And then it's time for today's perspective on France 24. And think modern art, and here in Paris you think perhaps of the Pompidou Centre or the Musée d'Art Moderne. If you think London, well, you inevitably think of Tate Modern, the massive hulking museum created inside what used to be the Bankside power station on the south bank of the River Thames in central London, just opposite St Paul's Cathedral. It's one of the capital's iconic buildings with much iconic art inside it as well. And joining me now from London is Francis Morris, who is its director. Thanks very much for being with us and talking to us on the programme today. First of all, just tell us what the aim of Tate Modern is. I mean, what are you hoping that people will get out of it when they go and see it?
Well, we have an official aim, which is to increase the public's enjoyment and understanding of modern and contemporary art. But of course, underneath that, there's a purpose. And I think all of us who work in the museum believe, very profoundly that an experience of art can enrich and change your life, and that art is an extraordinary lens through which to look at the world. And, I'm talking to you on a news programme this morning, and there's never been a moment in my life when art felt so relevant and urgent in our lives.
Why is it so urgent?
Well, I think we have no answers, and we're not sure about the questions to ask. And artists are mediators between the world in which we live and the questions we have to ask. And I think works of art can be thinking objects, and therefore to present a perspective on history through the lens of art and to think about the future through the lens of art can be a really important role for the museum today.
You mentioned accessibility at the beginning there. I mean, we've seen some images of the museum. It's obviously a fabulous building which attracts lots of people in the first place. But how do you go about attracting different audiences? I mean, I know, for example, if I go to art museums in Paris, it does tend to be a very niche audience that you might get there.
Well, it's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, currently, Tate is one of London's top, or the UK's top 10 visitor attractions, which is remarkable for a museum that is less than 20 years old. We're also the world's most popular museum of modern and contemporary art, and yet we still have an issue with diversity. Our collection, our programme, the people who work at Tate do not reflect the demographic of the city in which we operate. And I think there's a disconnect between the institution and the public we serve. We are a national museum. We should reflect our audiences. Our collection is effectively owned by the nation. So we have both a short-term view and a long view. And in the short term, we're trying to use the programme to reflect the interests, the histories, the concerns of the demographic of London, a very cosmopolitan city. But we're also trying to work through programmes of lifelong learning, of access, and working with young people, both to increase the sort of, I suppose, the ethnic demographic, the gender basis of what we do, but above all, I think, appeal to poorer sectors of our community. It's really fascinating when you look at our audience data that 70% of audiences, 70% of all our visitors have a degree. So that suggests that we have a highly educated audience. We know it's a young audience, but it doesn't reflect the communities that live and breathe around us in South London.
Why is it not working, though? Because, I mean, it's not just the Tate, is it? Just here in Paris as well. You walk around it, it is a lot of middle-aged white people that tend to go to art museums.
I think that's. We love middle-aged white people. That, for starters, we're not wanting to welcome our current audience. But I think museums in general have a problem. We've taken down the barriers of ticket prices. Tate Modern is free to our audiences. But I think over the years, the kind of old-fashioned temple model of the museum, the idea that here was a place full of riches and a kind of authoritative, godlike voice who told you what was important, just doesn't suit the world in which we live. So creating a sense of relevance, taking down the barriers, opening up the thresholds are really important. And you can do that in myriad ways. One of the ways we're doing that at Tate Modern is actually to reflect the way that artists work. Artists don't really differentiate any longer between painting and music. They'll do a gig in the Turbine Hall, they'll do an exhibition in the Spaces. So we're becoming increasingly a public space. Philip Perino, French artist who did a project with us 2 years ago, described the Tate as a park. And I love that idea that we're a civic space where people can come and learn something, they can play together, they can spend the day, they can picnic. It's opening up the museum, and we're now beginning to see a real change in our demographic, so that we have almost, I think, 19–20% black and minority ethnic visitors, which is a huge turnaround in the last 10 years. So we are getting there, and it's a really exciting moment as we move towards a much more representative, becoming a much more representative organisation and institution.
What about the artists as well? Because I know you've been trying to encourage and ensure that a lot of women are represented, for example, amongst the artists.
Well, I have a personal commitment, and my team has a very strong commitment to addressing gender balance. So we do have a commitment to, for our monographic, our solo rooms being 50–50 between men and women. But it's not just about a kind of a political balancing. It's also about looking back at the history of art and adjusting according to that institutional neglect. I mean, we have for many years failed to recognise the singular stellar achievements of generations of women artists, and now is the time to give them space. And that is having a huge impact on the way that people think about art history. We've also, for many years, told a very narrow NATO story about art history. We've told the art history of Western Europe and North America. We're now beginning to tell a much broader and more dynamic and fascinating history that talks about a networked history of art across the world from the earliest years of the 20th century. So broadening, diversifying, reflecting today. We look at history from the point of view of the present day, continuously updating and rethinking. History is a living thing that we can all have access to through art.
And how does it work between galleries? Because obviously there are new art exhibitions opening, new museums opening all the time. The Pompidou Centre here in Paris obviously is... I mean, are you working together? Are you working against each other to try and get the best art into your museum?
Well, we work together. I mean, we rarely do anything without partnership at Tate Modern. Partnership is absolutely our lifeblood. It brings discussion, it brings energy, it brings strength in numbers. In relation to French museums, we have very well-established histories of partnership with many of your national institutions. We have conversations and collaborations with Musée d'Orsay, wonderful new director there, Laurence Descartes, with Pompidou Centre, with Bernard Blistein. And of course, only last year, I made a major exhibition of Alberto Giacometti, working with Catherine Grenier, the director of Giacometti Foundation. And I was there in Paris last week for the opening of this extraordinary new foundation building. More broadly than that, of course, we have very strong relationships with people like, with the organisation like Aware in Paris, which is, like Tate, dedicated to surfacing and celebrating the achievements of women artists. So we work with French organisations, we work with American organisations throughout Europe, and increasingly beyond Europe and America, we're working with big museums and small museums to deliver extraordinary partnerships.
Frances Morris, good to have you with us on the programme today. Frances Morris, Director of the Tate in London. Good luck with the future exhibitions. Hope that programme to try and diversify a little bit more as well goes well for you there in London. Thanks very much.
Many thanks.